Hey there, welcome to episode 82 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo, recording this at 1:10 in the afternoon on Wednesday, June 4, 2025. Like an hour or two ago, my voice was doing much better, so I'll apologize now if it starts flaking out. And if you're curious, my right leg, which I injured 1 week ago yesterday, missed a step on a staircase of 4 stairs. Brilliant. I've done a Kofi solo episode about that, 2 of them actually from last week. If you're curious, I'll just say continuous improvement, doing okay. If you are not familiar with the Quaggling Sand audio program, you're probably wondering, what is that technical term you're using? Well, you may use the more normal sort of civilian term, the layperson's words. Pins and needles. Quaggling sand is the sensation you feel when circulation returns to a limb that may have been blocked if you were sitting on your foot, laying on your arm, etc., etc. It's a term I coined decades ago, still in use today. The title of today's episode is Outsourcing. I was almost going to say the title of today's outsourcing. Outsourcing, a common thing and a more popular notion to not have in recent weeks. I'm gonna go through some of my own personal experiences with outsourcing. We'll see what I come up with. Outsourcing. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes. The show notes contains a summary, which I'll read to you, and the same 4 links that I have every week. I've determined that it takes me approximately 3 minutes to go through the 4 standard links. I need to cut that down, and I also should go back to 2 links since the 4 links are 2 pairs. Either way, let's get started. The summary of today's episode. As a software engineer, among other things, I have been watching the changes to the marketplace with more and more announcements that layoffs in favor of artificial intelligence tools are replacing human programmers, or now that the jobs themselves are simply going away as AI becomes the latest shiny toy. I have seen this before. Wait a minute, I thought this was about outsourcing. Hang on. buymeacoffee.com/danhugo and buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts for episodes of Buy Me an Update available exclusively on Buy Me a Coffee. You do not have to spend any money on either this or the next website, Kofi.com. The Kofi.com/DanHugo profile page has links to my various audio programs. It has links to some of the organizations and projects on which I am working. It has some biographical information at the top, a few other affiliate links for coffee beans and whatnot. And way at the top, you will find a link to the posts section where Buy Me an Update is published on Mondays. It's an audio program, 5 minutes or less. What were the topics of last week's episodes and any news and announcements upcoming? Check it out. Kofi.com, the key next to the 0 on most keyboards, ko-fi.com/danhugo, and the Kofi Coffee Solo, audio program, No Schedule, kofi.com/danhugo/posts. It is unscheduled, no specific topic, comes out whenever, about whatever. Like I said, I did a couple of episodes about my leg injury, among other things, last week, end of May. So you can check those out if you want. Remember that neither of these, buymeacoffee.com or kofi.com, are a path to you paying me money. You're certainly welcome to through either of these platforms. Not required, no obligation. I use these as another way to engage, keep in touch with my audience, if there is one. My adoring public. So that's all. No links otherwise for today, just me rambling a little bit about outsourcing, but not so much about AI tools because that's sort of new, but it's sort of the same thing over again. Let's get started so we can get finished. Outsourcing, reshoring, and all that. There's a lot of chaos in these current times around reshoring manufacturing. This is bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. and, more importantly, manufacturing infrastructure. So assembly lines, supply chains, transportation, rail, trucks, etc. All the stuff you need to have functioning to build things, making these domestic jobs in general, basically. So bringing them back or making more domestic jobs in manufacturing. or I guess more generally, just making things could be just about anything. Where until now, a lot of manufacturing jobs had moved overseas where labor costs are lower. And then they developed all the infrastructure to enable rapid supply in, manufacture, finished goods out, shipping, skills development, etc. All kinds of stuff. All the moving parts are moving either where they are or back to the US. And the same thing has happened over the decades with such things as content creation, especially bulk mailing, so like spam, even assembling paper mailings. Anything you need to be done in bulk, you can ship it over to another country, have people do it for less hourly or whatever the payment scheme is, and ship it back. And then you got tech and customer support, of course, even software development. So technical support, you're probably speaking to someone in another country. I have traveled to some places where people have have benefited from this shift in where labor is paid for. So labor is paid for there, not so much here from the US perspective. And I have met some people who benefited elsewhere and eventually moved to the US to continue pursuing their career, to pursue additional education, or to be entrepreneurial. I've literally talked to people who said, my family never had credit cards. We never had, extra money. And then when he started working in his country for, doing outsourced work, they had more money coming in. They had more access to funds. They had more access to credit and so on. So for better or worse, that was bringing someone into the modern financial era and all the headaches that entails. And people have moved here once they establish themselves there. They continue their education, and more than once, somebody has started a company and done quite well. Generally speaking, outsourcing and offshoring have been uplifting for the world, while still leaving the U.S. a top 2 or top 3, often a top manufacturer of some precise and very expensive technologies and purveyor of premium services all around the world. So in other words, America did not stop being a manufacturing player on the global playing field. And again, top manufacturer, top 2, top 3, depending on exactly what it is. But generally speaking, we just stopped making small things and maybe cars. No, some cars are still made in America. Sudden efforts to reshore, that is, bring them back, and maybe penalize outsourced development are interesting choices, but I actually think a reassessment of how the global economy, global supply chains, and the future of all manner of development of anything, or just about anything, will proceed into the future. So in doing this, I will look back into my own experiences. Wait, how is this related to AI? Hang on. I worked at Apple in different parts of Apple quality to get started when I first moved to Silicon Valley in 1993. Graduated from college, headed to Silicon Valley. That's what everybody else was doing. I had always been an Apple fan, so this would have been a dream job, or at least the beginnings of a dream job. And looking back, it was certainly formative as far as my career and awareness of some things. I typed some things, but it's 2 words. Not the least of which was how big companies work, how they function. And Apple was not so big back then as it is now, but still a big company. But also how big companies work globally. Apple had an established presence in Cork, Ireland for some time at that point. I mean, a long time. And it was also, they also had a presence in Singapore. I'm not sure for how long at that point. As it happens, Apple Quality had teams in both of these places, which happened to be about 8 hours apart. So I think it's 7 hours sometimes, depending on time zones and whatnot, but call it 8 hours, roughly. 8 hours between Cupertino and Singapore, Ireland. Cupertino is the Apple headquarters where the spaceship is now, the R&D complex back then, which means about approximately a 24-hour. I mean, you could have a 24-hour workday with approximately 8 hours per shift, if you like. So basically close enough so that you would, at the end of your workday, hand off what you were working to the next section of the 24-hour day. As long as we were communicative, you would get a full day per day of, we'll say work, but it wasn't as easy as manufacturing. It was more writing some code and checking new hardware and release. Anyway, lots of stuff. The internets had been around for a while at this point. The Mosaic browser was just coming onto the scene. I literally tried it out for the first time, the first month or two working there at Apple. A friend of mine from college sent me an email, said, "Hey, have you checked out this Mosaic thing? It's from these people at NCSA, they're the World Wide Web, some guy at CERN, all the stuff that nobody knows about anymore." So I gave it a try on the Apple network. I was connected via local net, the slowest of networking, inside the Apple network, inside the Apple corporate network. So I could check out the 10 websites that were around back then when Gopher was still available also as a protocol. But we were all playing with network communications in college, and it was all functioning long before that. So email and sharing files and information and data and whatnot, that had been around forever. So sharing information around the world on a daily, even hourly basis, not to mention emailing and possible calls, made a 24-hour day mostly a reality. I mean, with few exceptions, you could pretty much hum along at, continuously sharing updates and information and so on. And as long as you were not even rigorous, but as long as you paid attention, like, oh, I forgot to send that thing, so you make sure you send it or update it or whatever the case was. For our purposes, it was pretty much functional, not too much effort. So that was my first practical exposure to global collaboration. I worked at True Vision at one point. This is not going to be a full rundown, don't worry, but a couple of the highlights from my history where remote and distant collaboration came into play. So I worked at, it was actually called Rastrops when I joined. Rastrops was a maker of video cards. True Vision, a company in Indiana that was making video capture cards. Graphics are computer generated. Video comes from a camera or is displayed on a screen, but it's video, right? Video in, video out. It could be displayed on a television, etc. So that it's a distinction without a real difference, but you got to capture video. Graphics you render. So Rastrops was doing video cards. Rastrops was doing graphics cards. True Vision was doing video cards. So they merged or whatever. Rastrops was based in Santa Clara where I was. So when I started working there, they literally were signing the paperwork and all that. So the sign on the building changed within a couple of weeks and all that. True Vision was based in Indiana. Might still be. And I think they got acquired by Pinnacle. I think Avid bought them and Pinnacle bought Avid, something like that. All these video editing bay, professional, this, that. And while big companies do this all the time, here I got to experience the notion of a split development team in a smaller company. So the two companies together, a couple hundred people. So not startups, but not Apple, not big giant company. So, there were almost no cases where there was a direct counterpart because Rastrops had started down a development path and so was bringing in people like me who were not already working on graphics cards, but were aiming at video with familiarity in graphics and familiarity with Macintosh and other computing technologies. The True Vision folks had been developing the product, but more towards Windows, PC development. So it wasn't like they had to merge the companies and lay off half the people. So it actually worked out pretty nicely. And then communicating across time zones, even though it was only two, it was one of those things that kind of get you started. It was at True Vision that I got my first passport to travel to Japan. I had never traveled outside the country before, not counting Tijuana in college. So we had to do some work with Sony on the DV Pro editing station for sporting events. They were making the software and the kit, and they were using a Targa 2000 to capture video and stream it back out. So they were making use of the Targa 2000 board and the software I was working on. So I visited them in Atsugi or Mitsugi. I cannot remember now. Sony something. So some division of Sony. And it may have been in Mitsugi. I can't remember. It's been a while. It was an educational trip, and the ongoing conversation on the other side of the world was also useful. So here I am visiting and collaborating at a distance. Something interesting, perhaps. True Vision had some or all of their manufacturing in-house. I should say Rastrops initially. In Santa Clara on the ground floor of the Rastrops building. I assume they were making the Rastrops video cards there. Oh, sorry, graphics cards. I should update that. It's a small difference, but it is a difference. So they were making the graphics cards in the building. I cannot honestly say where target boards were made for Indiana. They may have had facilities in Indiana to build these. And I think we might have started we were certainly doing reworks in-house. So any hackery to fix things or during development. But I honestly don't remember if they were outsourcing development of the target boards. They were very intricate. So I honestly don't know. I worked at Netscape. I'm leaving out SCM Microsystems, which is between there. Even though they were a mostly European global company working in the chip card or smart card space. Of course, today we all have chip cards of some kind, and it's in fact the same exact physical device. The hardware is the same as in a SIM card that goes in some phones. Now the eSIM is making that go away. But yeah, the chip card, chip cotton, the ISO 7816 standard, all that. But in the 90s, when I was working for SCM Microsystems, the US was way behind. The American Express Blue Card had that chip, but it would only work with a reader or an interface device that American Express would send you. There was no card terminals, no point of sale terminals that would read or make use of the chip. Today, we all have a chip card. When I left SCM, and I don't even know if it stood for anything. When I left SCM to go to Netscape, part of the reason I went to Netscape and part of the reason they were interested in me doing that was that I had a brief but detailed background in the smart card space, which was intended to become an element of the Netscape security offerings, inclusion of smart cards as security tokens. This never really materialized, but again, chip cards have only more recently caught on broadly in the US, several lifetimes later in internet time, but it's probably been, this was the mid 90s. So you're looking at 25-ish years. I mean, over the last 25 years, they've caught on a lot more. I want to say the last 10 have seen a really, really broad adoption of smart cards. Anyway, not the point. Netscape was at the time bringing the World Wide Web to the masses, of course. A fun story, if you ever feel like learning more about this, is the origin of the Internet Explorer product from Microsoft. Here's a little hint. It was based on the Spyglass browser, which was itself an acquisition of the browser sources of a project at NCSA at Urbana-Champaign in Illinois. You probably don't remember this, but that is where the founding engineering team of Mosaic, the Mosaic browser, had developed the Mosaic browser, the product, which the school retained some rights to. So the team moved to Silicon Valley with Jim Clark. They hired Jim Barksdale to be the CEO, and he was funding a new startup, originally called Mosaic Communications, and then officially Netscape. One of the features of the company was to make all developers accessible to the public if they wanted by hosting content on company servers, which could be accessed in the usual way with the web browser, maybe a Netscape web browser. And we all do this today, of course, type in that were search engines and all this. Or through a little Easter egg that is long since gone. If you were using the Netscape browser, you could type about:"D Hugo, and you would land on my homepage on the servers. It's pretty neat. I mean, it's like, it's an Easter egg. Inside a little secret toy to play with. Anyway, it was while working at Netscape that I encountered a 13-year-old kid by email, also named Daniel Hugo, who reached out to me since he came across my name on the Netscape employee pages server at some point. I am reasonably certain this was the Xterra triathlete from South Africa, Dan Hugo. That would come some years later. So at age 13, though, I remember hearing or reading, I had never heard of this person, because he was not famous yet. Hey, I'm also Dan Hugo. I live in South Africa, and there you go. This is something of a sojourn off topic. It's not really about global supply chains or anything, but I had experienced firsthand now individuals and, of course, huge corporations were basically on a level global playing field when it came to communications, which is often how big things begin. I wonder what would have happened if young Dan Hugo and older Dan Hugo had actually stayed in touch, because occasionally I would be confused in name only. Like people would tweet about me. That Dan Hugo, DG Hugo, is, again, I assume, the 13-year-old kid from way back when. I've never actually followed up on that because that's kind of a weird question to ask somebody. But, I never met either of them in person, so there you go. I worked at UMax Computer Corporation. UMax is one of the highest UMax was one of the highest profile Apple clone companies of the time. So we're talking 1998. Yeah, through 1998, like 97. They had been doing it before that, but so late 90s. We were building Macintosh clones. They were actually built in Taiwan, maybe elsewhere. UMAX Data Systems was based in Taiwan and would do various electronics, computer systems, technology, manufacturing, development, etc. While all the engineering work for UMAX Computer Corporation was done in Santa Clara, across the street from Great America, if you're curious. The summer pass at Great America made for fun work days. A lot of stuff was going on in Santa Clara, actually, which was pretty much near the middle of Silicon Valley at the time, in that era. Like that's where stuff was going on. Intel, Adobe was in San Jose, but a lot of stuff in the Santa Clara area or very near Mountain View, etc. I never visited Taiwan for UMAX, but some of my colleagues would head there now and then for manufacturing issues or supply chain questions or meetings and whatever else. I think they did some manufacturing in China also. UMAX, though, had subsidiaries in, we were one, of course, UMAX Computer Corporation, that was us, in another locale, but nearby, in Fremont, that was the UMAX Technologies, I think it was UMAX Technologies, Inc., which was selling UMAX branded scanners and other low-cost computer tech. They were doing mostly OEM packaging and selling and so on. And wherever else. This UMAX Data Systems, part of the UMAX group, was big. They also had a relationship with TSMC, which today, of course, everybody probably knows. That's another story. We also had relationships with Motorola and IBM, of course, for the PowerPC phase of the life of UMAX Computer Corp. And we would eventually flip and flop to the dark side, building Intel designs as the very first Pentium 2 slot processors were launching. So we were their launch partner. And that happened thanks to a kerfuffle between Intel and a company in Mountain View called Intergraph. Intergraph decided to sue Intel, and Intel decided to stop working with Intergraph. Go figure. And the head of UMAX Group, I think his name was Andy Chang, was sitting next to Andy Grove at a gathering in Taiwan, some event. Apparently they had a chat, and boy, we really need a new boutique launch partner for our new products. Oh, that's funny. We make new products, and we would love to be your launch partner. It was probably something as simple as that, but that's how it happened. And that was a truly global playing field on which UMAX got to spread its wings a little bit for a little while, and then everything kind of fell apart. But most of us together, it was a big group move to Philips. I worked at Philips Components at a time when Philips was a global corporation on the upper end of the size range. I think we had 160,000. I say we, like I was really part of it. I think we had about 160,000 employees worldwide across multiple divisions. There was Philips Medical, Philips Components, where we were, Philips Components. There must have been a Philips Consumer Electronics because they made Philishave and televisions and so on. So they must have been, anyway. So Philips Components made parts that would go into other things. I was in the Philips Flat Display Systems group in the Software and Electronics Business Unit, but okay, that's enough about that. So we were making, so our business group, Flat Displays, was making LCD screens, which were cutting edge at the time. If you remember, the first LCD TV available was from Philips, and it was a $15,000 junk display TV. That's how things start. But think LCD screens for phones and desktop monitors way back when. It was there that I encountered a business colleague from India who had a team of people working for him back home. This would be a side hustle of sorts in today's language. And he offered their services for some side project that I was working on, mostly website design components and all, and other stuff around the idea. So I was working on the ideas, and I said, I'm not really a web designer or anything. Oh, I have a team of people that can help you out if you want. I can send you an email, I'll connect you with them, and they can do some work for you. Well, I mean, at the time, yeah, okay, great, sure. And of course, you think, oh, I can get some work done at a lower rate just because of the nature of the economies. This was my first encounter with outsourcing of any kind directly. And I have to say, I was amazed. I was amazed on what a scam this was. Now, I am not commenting on the culture, the country, or the people of India in general, but this team of people in particular was sending me sample work that I had seen in free website template collections, for example, Their work was estimated in hours with over $1,500 to get started in billable time. But what they were showing me was 10 minutes of effort on top of otherwise available starting points, free stuff. I myself was more than proficient at editing HTML and whatnot, so this was a non-starter, but it did open my eyes a little bit. I remember referring a couple of people to this outsourcing firm before I knew better. Like I had been referred and I said, oh, I'm talking to these people if you want to check it out. I wasn't giving like an endorsement, just a referral. I got similar feedback. Basically, they seemed a little bit, this firm seemed a little bit expensive for something that did not look so special. It would seem that they were trying to leverage a rush to build websites. So at the time, everybody, oh, we got to have a website. We got to have a domain. We got to have it. Got to have it. So yeah, we'll build your website. It'll take us 2 days or something. And then you can approve it and all this. And this was before Fiverr and what else? Scriptlance, all these other outsourcing website platforms. I was more than proficient myself though. But when I talked to these other people, they were maybe not so technical. They just needed to accomplish, I just need a website. So they were trying to build the websites and other online presence for people who are maybe not so savvy or simply lack the time and wherewithal to do the work themselves or to find local help. So they were filling a need, but I think they were sort of taking advantage a little bit too much. And that was, for me, the take home was like outsourcing is not the end of the line. It's not the solution. It's the beginning of another collection of problems. Trust me. But that was my first personal interaction where I kind of said, what is this? This is not legitimate. Later, I would work at Jawbone, which was originally called Aleph, A-L-I-P-H, makers of fine, actually really good, Bluetooth headsets, which would make contact with one side of your jawbone, hence the rename, to determine when its microphones on the other part of the device were detecting the actual speech of the wearer. This was a cool feature when you think about it. If someone else said something, the digital signal processing in the Bluetooth headset would not consider that to be speech of the wearer, so it would reject that as noise. It was pretty cool for the time. It was a functional and useful innovation. It was cool at the time, and the inventor was brilliant and loved airplanes, and he was generally an interesting, though somewhat aloof character. He made his money. I believe his wife made a ton of money as a surgeon at the Mayo Clinic somewhere. I think they were pretty much going for early retirement. All manufacturing was done in China, which is where I entered the picture. Though I never did go to China nor to Mexico on behalf of Jawbone. The goal was to have a second manufacturing facility in Mexico so they weren't 100% dependent on China. I think there was also some concerns about tech transfer, intellectual property, security, and so on. We had a couple of employees, they were our employees, based inside the factory where our products were built at a company called Fox-Link in the Guangdong province somewhere. 2 of our employees were former Fox-Link employees. One was a manager from the US who relocated to live there. Basically, it was an essential reality that the friendly connection between employees and former employees on the manufacturing floor were essential for any sort of meaningful communications, not to mention any sort of trust and useful production output, including getting data about production. Somewhere along the way, a little side project I took on was capturing as much manufacturing data from our actual production lines as possible with the help of our 2 employees and analyzing failure rates across production lines. We had 3 production lines and just looking at how they worked, how they were functioning, failure modes, because we were trying to reproduce these production lines. So I wanted to see if we were able to reproduce at a better or a lower failure rate, right? So we could actually make at least the same or maybe more devices. So, okay, let me see what we have, where we're starting. Initial conditions. What I discovered was that our production levels were higher. That means more devices were being built and our production schedule more dense. At one point I said, how many shifts do we have? And they said, 2 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week. I said, the production lines are running 24/7 based on the data I have. Well, that's how you make more devices. I was discussing this with the US side of the company. These and a few other anomalies suggested that more devices were coming off the lines and more than were being accounted for and more often. The items were most likely going out the side door after hours, perhaps. But given the nature of the stable, the production lines were delivering what they wanted. So the losses were not worth the risk of throwing off their main production numbers. So if perhaps some items were going out through a side door and being sold in an alternate marketplace, cost of doing business. There were some other things. I've worked at a variety of companies, making a lot of things, a lot of hardware, a lot of stuff, and then not to mention just general cross-border interactions in a variety of ways, either internally within the same company or between companies, partners, vendors, etc. It's a complicated world. It's a complicated world. We hope that doing this has improved things, but it's a lot of work. Outsourcing is hard. And these are only a couple of tiny examples, just me. And working at Philips was interesting. I never really worked with the outsourcing of the manufacturing, global developments. Intel was a global company already. They were manufacturing stuff all over the place. But I witnessed these things directly with some take homes for myself. Based on these, outsourcing or offshoring or anything similar is just not easy. Communication across language, culture, time zone, maybe even the main thing to ponder, I would say, is a sense of team. They require a lot of effort and often a lot of time to establish that sense of team. The business relationship may not be under one company umbrella, so you may not all work for the same company. There may be consultants or contracts, third parties, a fourth party. Maybe the government gets involved. Maybe it's purely between the companies themselves. Usually the government or border policies will get involved when it comes to shipping things in and out, finished versus unfinished goods. The list goes on. But at the human level, there does need to be that sense that we are actually working together. It is always a possibility, though we would all hope not if we were pursuing these sorts of relations, that there are bad actors in the mix. So hope not. Reality does kick in. Maybe somewhere in there is someone looking to make a bit more money or to move some of the products through that side door. Maybe some of the intellectual property finds its way into knockoff products, or who knows what other variations on these themes. All kinds of stuff goes on. That this is a possibility, rare or not, means spending resources, whether time or money, or likely both, to try to counter these, hopefully before they happen. Hopefully. I have to think Apple, for example, among the highest profile names in the mix in the news of the day as I'm recording this, has spent every waking hour in all time zones tuning and honing their manufacturing processes, their supply chains, and their oversight infrastructure to make sure production of their products, iPhones, of course, probably the shining star among them, make all that as close to optimal as they can get, trying to maximize margins and all that. Moving any or all of that takes time and a lot of money, and then more time to have it all settle back into a modicum of efficiency. Part of the challenge that is real is when they say, well, you can't just start up a factory overnight. The skill to manufacture a product reproducibly, high quality, low failure rate. This is the thing I was looking at Jawbone, watching the failure modes, trying to see which devices could be retested after some tuning or fixing or whatever the case. Like this was I don't know if you've ever seen a Bluetooth headset, a little teeny tiny thing. The electronics were small. It did require some precision placement of microphone boots, these little rubber enclosures that would surround the microphone to keep air out. So you're only getting sound in from the outside, not from within the cavity of the headset. So a small, reasonably precise assembly, some attention to detail on the quality checks on the production line. That's especially where I was looking. You can't just turn that around in a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months. Believe it or not, Apple used to manufacture Macintosh computers in Sacramento, I believe it was. They probably did some manufacturing in Cork, but I know they did domestic manufacturing of some of their Macintosh computers a long time ago. So migration to other locations is complicated, and you have to build up that sense of team, that I'm building an iPhone, and how many crises have taken place over the decades with various people having various issues, working too long and becoming depressed and frustrated and worse with awful outcomes. Or people leaving. This is not funny, but it's funny to think that when you open your iPhone box, there might be a note inside that says, please help me, or they're killing us. That's awful. would it seem real? But these are all anecdotally, taking place over the decades. Apple started manufacturing. They launched the iPhone in, I think was it 2005? This one I'll actually look up. iPhone launch date. Oh, 2007, June 29th, 2007. That was close. So starting in 2007, they're manufacturing these things in a factory that has not been manufacturing iPhones for 20 years. When you get to a factory that's been doing this for 20 years, they've gotten really good at it. And all of the dials have been adjusted just so the inputs, the outputs, all that stuff. So it's kind of interesting. It takes a lot of time. And you have to know that your production teams and the management and the checks and balances and the who's making sure that the products are correct and they're going to the right places, all this stuff. And then not to mention the supply chains. And the iPhone is used as an example of just how complicated and even complex these things are. It does not just happen. So my own take on outsourcing, based on my own interactions, remember, we're going to get to AI in a second. Hopefully you're already seeing where this is going. Based on my own interactions with actual people, whether here in the US or in other places, and my own hands-on experiences working through this process in various forms, seeing what works, knowing what does not work, I think there has been plenty of room for an analysis, a real deep dive into how global economic forces, supply chains, and trade in general work or don't across all of the verticals, including services. So verticals like technology, clothing, plastic products of any kind. The list is almost endless. It would be worthwhile to be involved in checking these things, looking at them, analyzing them, and auditing them. This is a galactic ask, to be sure. Try to figure out how the world works. Go. The vastness of global manufacturing and trades make a single opinion almost meaningless. What do I know? But I do think keeping things at status quo in the post-pandemic recovery time frame, which is ongoing in many places, would have been my preference. It took a while to get here. Maybe we should take at least a little while to think about where we're going. Nobody asked me though, but had they, I would have spent years on this, starting 10 years ago, perhaps. It is a complicated and complex collection of intertwined systems that have been designed and perhaps grown organically over decades, with entire social constructs built around them in some places. There are cities in China and other places that have been built for the purposes of building and, taking inputs, building, manufacturing, assembling, and generating outputs and transporting them out to a ship so that they can be shipped, exported. So it's become an interconnected part of life in many places. This will not happen in our lifetimes, but I think some really interesting things could be and might be someday considered to actually design and frequently optimize global supply chains and manufacturing and services so that there is a general elevation of everybody. Why not? Overly optimistic, yes, but who knows what will come from the chaos today, but opportunity for tomorrow. Now, we're just at the very beginning of what AI is going to do, but I wanted to take a moment to look at what I've learned about outsourcing manufacturing, because what was the goal? We're going to be able to manufacture more things. We're going to be able to do it at a lower cost. We'll be able to do it more quickly. Supply chains will make obtaining the inputs, the parts, the pieces, the ingredients reasonable, like best sources. The ability to move items, materials around was easier in a post-Bretton Woods world. So shipping lanes were guarded and protected, and piracy was reasonable and low, and ensuring shipping and shipping routes was reasonable, timely. So everything was kind of working. So the idea was, we can take what we're doing here locally and we'll move it to someplace else. We'll have some other way of doing it that will ultimately be better, faster, cheaper. It'll be amazing. And we'll just take the people that were doing those things here locally and we'll have them do other things. Now, for the most part, that worked over time. Did it work in the space of a year or two? No. When you start shutting down factories and moving manufacturing to other places, there will be people who are not ready. Am I ready for my job to be disappeared out in the world because of AI tools? Oh, that's where we're going, by the way. Not necessarily. And this is now the talk of the town, the unemployment rate among computer science, computer engineering, especially junior level, is higher than those with arts focus, liberal arts degrees, and so on. So when junior employees are no longer being employed, you will reduce the number of senior employees in a few years because there are no more junior employees becoming senior employees. So where outsourcing was a net gain in some ways, it was an extremely risky move in others and has, in fact, changed the landscape, not only of economics, supply chains, products, sales, selling those products in different places. Of course, tariffs have now entered the picture again, but trade balances and all the complications that go along with that. So now if you take something as disruptive, and by the way, the shipping container itself, you should look at the history of that. That on its own is fascinating, and the impact that it's had on global supply chains and manufacturing and imports and exports and the global economy and all that. But if you take something like AI that's moving easily 10 times faster, it's not going to take a decade to figure out how to reduce a workforce and replace it with these automated tools. It's already happening, apparently, with various levels of success, ? It will be interesting to see, because essentially what we're looking at is outsourcing not to people, humans, or robots or mechanization, but outsourcing to a black box, right? A black box is something where you don't know how it works inside. It just works. It gives you what you want, don't know how. So if I'm outsourcing my company's intellectual property development or anything, HR, any white collar jobs or work, later it'll be the assembly line, it'll be the robotics replacing humans, delivery of food, who knows what it is. But if you completely lean into this and you reduce the number of people who are doing these things, initially in the short run, they're just not going to be doing anything. There's nothing for them to do. And then they'll be retraining and they'll be figuring out what comes next and entrepreneurial ventures. That's where I prefer. Over the long term, now, remember, by completely outsourcing manufacturing of some things, of a lot of things, America, for example, this marketplace has been extremely consumer oriented, but not very production oriented. We still make things, just not the things that you and I buy. Supercomputing technologies and whatnot, although that's also changing in the more recent weeks and months, but still a source of tech, still a source of innovation and all that. But you do put all that at risk by outsourcing. Now, if you take all of your development and mechanical, like physical, if you take all of your mental and physical labor and you automate it into AI implementations, and there's no longer 3 people doing 3 jobs, but one AI kind of does all of them, maybe, and you hope, hey, that's a big giant win, until it is not. So I am looking at AI and what's going on today. And remember, when in the outsourcing and globalization of economies and manufacturing and supply chain, all that, there has been a tremendous amount of intellectual property concern. When I was at Jawbone, there was a huge concern that the calibration technology, which was patented by Jawbone, by that same engineer that did the microphone on your Jawbone, I think his name is Greg. So there was a patent for the calibration tools that would fill in some constants in a DSP algorithm to make sure it was picking up and canceling noise and getting your voice out of it. So the calibration technology had to be kept secret. Was it secret? Who knows? It was in a factory on a floor in a building in China. You're only as good as your employees can keep an eye on it. That may have been moved somewhere else. So you may have had somebody just say, hey, we're going to take your intellectual property because it's here and we have access to it, and we're going to make our own version of this and we'll sell. This happens all the time. So now you can just say, well, AI has to be able to consume the internet and all of your visual, creative artwork and video and audio and all of your written word assets and everything. And we're just going to use it to make this new thing, even though we didn't ask you. So I'm seeing a lot of parallels between the impact many, many, many years later on outsourcing and the loss of some momentum in some places. This is not like a national thing or a patriotism thing. This is just a practicality. When you shift all of your capabilities without concern for what might happen if, fill in the blank, then you get to figure out what those things were the hard way. And I suspect that we'll start to see the same things with AI And yeah, so that's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to actually retitle. I'm going to add, just to make sure, Outsourcing and AI. Outsourcing and AI, the new title of today's episode, but everything else is the same. So there you go. Thank you for listening. Of course, this episode went on for a bit, but I've been pondering this for a while, and I think there are some big things, some big questions are coming. The answers may not be great. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. I thank you for listening through my scratchy voice. I'm going to have to figure out why this took a turn today. It is very humid. We are getting some rain in Vegas. That's never a good sign. It is the end of the allergy season, but who knows? The allergy season has been moving around every year. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. So thank you so much for listening. Do check out Coffee Solo and buy me an update if you have a chance. See what you think. In the meantime, we'll be back next week as usual. Take care.